own species. The rain hammered against the medical station's reinforced windows as Dr. Sarah Chen finished her rounds in the xenobiology ward. The frontier outpost of New Geneva had seen its share of strange cases since humanity joined the Galactic Federation, but nothing quite prepared her for what she would encounter that stormy night. Sarah wiped her hands clean after treating a Zephyrian trader's acid burns. The blue-skinned merchant had been careless around his ship's fuel cells, but his species' natural resistance to corrosives meant the wounds would heal quickly with basic treatment. She glanced at the chronometer on her wrist, nearly midnight, local time. Her shift should have ended hours ago, but the skeleton crew meant she often worked double shifts. The communications panel crackled to life, interrupting her thoughts. Dr. Chan to Emergency Bay 7. Priority medical transport incoming. Sarah sighed and grabbed her emergency kit. She'd learned to expect anything on this remote station. New Geneva sat at the crossroads of three major trade routes, serving as a neutral meeting ground for dozens of alien species. The Federation had established it as a model of interspecies cooperation, but Sarah often wondered if the politicians who made that decision had ever actually dealt with the reality of alien medicine. She hurried through the sterile corridors, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls. The station's architecture was purely functional, long passages connecting modular sections that could be sealed independently in case of emergency. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows as she passed observation windows looking out into the void of space. 3 moons hung in the distance, their pale light reflecting off the hulls of dozens of ships docked at the station's various ports. Emergency Base 7 was located in the outer ring, reserved for potentially contaminated or dangerous arrivals. As Sarah approached, she could hear the distinctive whine of atmospheric processors working overtime. Whatever was coming in required a completely sterile environment. She palmed the door controls and stepped into the preparation chamber. Through the reinforced viewing port, she could see a small alien vessel settling onto the landing pad. It was unlike anything in her databases, organic curves that seemed to flow like water, with a surface that shifted between deep purple and black. No external markings or identification that she could see. Any information on our visitors? She asked the duty officer through the comm system. Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled back with obvious frustration. Negative, document. They've been broadcasting a medical emergency signal for the past 6 hours, but won't respond to any communication attempts. The universal translators aren't picking up their language pattern. All we know is they claim to have a medical emergency aboard. Sarah frowned. The Federation's universal translators were remarkably sophisticated, capable of interpreting even the most exotic alien languages within minutes. For them to fail completely suggested either a completely unknown species or deliberate interference. Life signs? 2 aboard, both stable. But there's something else, our scanners are picking up a third life form. Readings are weak and intermittent. Could be injured, or... Morrison's voice trailed off. Or dying, Sarah finished grimly. She sealed her environmental suit and double-checked her equipment. Whatever species was aboard that ship, she was about to become their first point of contact with humanity. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. The alien vessel's boarding ramp extended with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. 2 figures emerged into the harsh lighting of the docking bay, and Sarah got her first look at the Kathmari. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs that moved with predatory grace. Their skin was a deep indigo that seemed to absorb light, and their heads were crowned with elaborate crests of what looked like living metal. Most striking were their eyes, large, multifaceted organs that reflected light like mirrors, giving them an insectoid appearance despite their otherwise mammalian features. The 2 aliens approached her with obvious reluctance. The larger one, distinguished by golden threads woven through its crest, spoke in a voice like grinding crystal. Human. We require medical disposal services for contaminated biological waste. Standard Federation rates acceptable. Sarah blinked, certain she had misheard. I'm sorry, disposal services? I'm a doctor. I was told you had a medical emergency. The second alien, smaller but with similar coloring, made a sound that might have been laughter. Emergency resolved. Contaminated entity contained. Simple disposal required.
A chill ran down Sarah's spine. What contaminated entity?
Our scanners detected a third life form aboard your vessel. The larger alien's crest flattened against its skull, a sign of irritation, Sarah realized.
Defective genetic line. Rejected by breeding protocols. Standard disposal required to prevent contamination spread. Understanding hit Sarah like a physical blow. They weren't talking about medical waste at all. They were talking about a living being.
You want me to euthanize someone? She asked, her voice carefully controlled.
Euthanize?
The alien's multifaceted eyes seemed to focus on her with new interest.
Unknown term. Entity is waste product. Disposal prevents genetic contamination of breeding lines. Simple medical procedure, yes? Sarah's hands clenched into fists inside her environmental suit.
She'd heard rumors about species that practiced genetic purification, but experiencing it firsthand was different. I need to examine this individual before any procedures can be performed.
Federation medical protocols require full evaluation.
The aliens exchanged what might have been words in their own language, a series of harmonic tones that made Sarah's teeth ache.
Finally, the larger one gestured toward their ship with obvious impatience. Examination unnecessary. Genetic defects confirmed by breeding council. Entity serves no function. Human disposal services required only.
Nevertheless, Sarah said firmly, I cannot and will not perform any medical procedures without first conducting my own examination.
If you want Federation medical services, you follow Federation protocols. The tension in the docking bay was palpable. Sarah could see the aliens' crests rising and falling in what she suspected was a threat display.
For a moment, she wondered if she had pushed too far. These beings were clearly stronger than humans, and their attitude suggested they weren't accustomed to being denied.
Finally, the larger alien made a sound like grinding metal. Human examination permitted. Time limit, 1 standard hour. Disposal to commence afterward.
Sarah nodded curtly and followed them toward their ship, her medical scanner recording everything. The vessel's interior was as alien as its exterior, walls that curved in, flowed like living tissue, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents that made her environmental filters work overtime. They led her through winding corridors to what appeared to be a cargo hold. In the center of the space sat a containment unit that looked more like a prison cell than medical equipment. Through the transparent aluminum walls, Sarah could see a small figure curled in the far corner. At first glance, it appeared to be a juvenile member of the same species as her escorts. But, as Sarah looked closer, she could see the differences that had condemned it to death. Where the adults had the predatory grace of apex predators, this individual was smaller, more delicate. Its crest was shorter and had an almost silvery quality that caught the light beautifully. Most striking were its eyes. Instead of the cold, multifaceted orbs of its species, this being had large, expressive eyes that seemed almost familiar.
What specific genetic defects are you claiming? Sarah asked, setting up her portable scanner. The smaller alien produced what appeared to be a biological readout. Crest malformation. Optical irregularities.
Reduced aggression markers. Unsuitable for breeding protocols or military service.
Classification, genetic waste.
Sarah studied the readout, comparing it to her own scans. What the Kethmari called defects looked more like natural genetic variation to her experienced eye.
The individual in the containment unit wasn't sick or malformed, it was simply different from the rigid physical standards its species demanded.
Has this individual been given any medical treatment? She asked, noting signs of dehydration and malnutrition on her scanner.
Treatment unnecessary for waste product. Containment sufficient until disposal. The casual cruelty in the alien's voice made Sarah's stomach turn.
She'd seen many examples of alien morality that differed from human standards, but this level of callous disregard for their own kind was shocking even by those standards. I need to conduct a thorough examination, she said, approaching the containment unit's control panel.
This will require direct contact. The larger alien stepped forward, its crest rising in alarm. Direct contact inadvisable. Genetic contamination possible. I'm in a fully sealed environmental suit, Sarah replied, already working on the containment unit's locks.
There's no risk of contamination. What she didn't mention was that her suit's medical sensors had already confirmed what she suspected: there was nothing wrong with the individual inside that proper medical care couldn't fix. The Kethmari weren't dealing with a genetic defect, they were dealing with someone who simply didn't fit their society's narrow definition of acceptable.
The containment unit opened with a soft hiss.
The young Kethmari, for Sarah was certain now that it was young, despite being nearly as large as a human adult, looked up with those strangely familiar eyes. When it saw her, it made a sound unlike anything she'd heard from the other aliens.
It was almost plaintive.
Sarah knelt beside the frightened creature, noting how it flinched away from her approach. Clearly, it had learned to fear contact with others. "It's all right," she said softly, knowing her words wouldn't be understood but hoping her tone would convey her intentions.
"I'm a doctor. I want to help."
She began her examination carefully, noting the individual's obvious fear and malnutrition. Her scanners confirmed what she'd suspected: this was a healthy young member of the species, showing no signs of genetic defects or disease. If anything, the variations in its physical structure suggested potential advantages rather than defects. The shortened crest, for instance, was more flexible than the rigid structures of the adults, suggesting enhanced sensory capability. The different eye structure provided better depth perception and color differentiation. The reduced aggression markers that so concerned the Kethmari might actually indicate higher intelligence and social adaptability. As she worked, Sarah became aware that the young alien was responding to her gentle touch. It had stopped flinching and was now watching her with obvious curiosity. When she used her medical scanner to check its hydration levels, it made a soft sound that reminded her remarkably of a cat's purr. The similarity was so striking that Sarah found herself smiling despite the grim circumstances. There was something about this being's manner and expressions that seemed almost familiar, as if it were trying to communicate in a way that transcended species barriers.
"Your examination is complete?"
The larger Kethmari's voice interrupted her observations. Sarah stood slowly, her mind racing. She had a choice to make, and it would define not only her own future but potentially the relationship between humanity and this newly encountered species. "My examination reveals no genetic defects or medical conditions requiring disposal," she said carefully. "This individual appears to be a healthy juvenile member of your species, albeit with some natural genetic variation."
The aliens' crests rose in unison, a display that Sarah was learning to recognize as agitation or anger.
"Human evaluation incorrect," the larger one stated flatly.
"Breeding Council determination final. Entity classified as waste. Disposal required."
"Under Federation medical protocols," Sarah replied, "I cannot perform euthanasia on a healthy individual without their explicit consent. This individual cannot provide such consent due to apparent mental distress caused by prolonged confinement and malnutrition." It wasn't entirely true. The Federation's protocols were more flexible regarding non-human species, but Sarah was betting that these aliens weren't familiar with the finer points of interspecies medical law. The two Kethmari exchanged rapid communications in their harmonic language.
Sarah could feel the tension building and prepared herself for a confrontation.
Her hand moved unconsciously to the emergency beacon on her belt, though she doubted station security would arrive in time if these aliens decided to resolve the matter with violence.
Finally, the larger alien turned back to her. "Human disposal services rejected. Alternative disposal arrangements will be made." Sarah's heart sank.
They were going to kill the young alien themselves, probably as soon as they left the station. "Wait," she said quickly.
"There is another option under Federation law."
The aliens paused, their multifaceted eyes fixing on her with renewed attention. "If this individual is truly unwanted by your society, you can surrender it to Federation custody. It would be classified as a refugee and provided with appropriate care and protection." The suggestion clearly hadn't occurred to them. The aliens conferred again in their musical language, and Sarah could sense their uncertainty. Whatever they were discussing, it was beyond their usual protocols. "Refugee status, acceptable," the larger alien finally said.
"Human responsibility for genetic waste acknowledged. Transfer of custody authorized."
Sarah felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by the realization of what she'd just committed herself to. She had no authority to accept refugees on behalf of the Federation, and no idea how the station's administration would react to her unauthorized decision. But, as she looked at the young Kathmari, still cowering in its containment unit, she knew she couldn't let it be destroyed simply because it didn't fit its species' narrow definitions of acceptable genetics. "Transfer accepted," she said formally. "Federation custody begins immediately." The aliens wasted no time in completing the paperwork. Within an hour, they had transferred legal responsibility for their former citizen to the station and departed without ceremony. Sarah found herself alone in the emergency bay with a frightened alien refugee and a growing awareness of the complications she'd just created. The young Kathmari had watched the proceedings with obvious intelligence, and Sarah was certain it understood, at least partially, what had transpired. When the ship's engines fired and its parent species departed forever, the alien made a sound of unmistakable grief. Sarah knelt beside the open containment unit, offering her hand in what she hoped was a universally understood gesture of comfort. To her surprise, the alien reached out with a delicate, clawed appendage and gently touched her gloved fingers. "It's going to be all right," she said softly. "I know you don't understand me yet, but I promise you you're safe now." The alien's response was that soft, purring sound again, and Sarah found herself smiling despite everything. There was something undeniably endearing about this creature, something that transcended species barriers and spoke to the compassionate instincts that had drawn her to medicine in the first place. As she led her new charge toward the medical bay, Sarah began to appreciate the magnitude of what she'd undertaken. She would need to find a way to communicate with the alien, understand its needs, and somehow convince the station administration that harboring an unauthorized refugee was in everyone's best interest. But, as challenging as those problems seemed, they paled in comparison to the larger question that was already forming in her mind: what did it say about the Kathmari as a species that they would abandon one of their own to die simply for being different? And what did it say about humanity that she couldn't bear to let that happen? The young alien followed her through the station's corridors with cautious steps, its large eyes taking in everything with obvious curiosity. Staff members they passed stopped to stare at the unusual pair, but Sarah ignored their surprised expressions. She had work to do, and the first priority was getting her patient proper medical care. In the medical bay, Sarah began the delicate process of treating the alien's malnutrition and dehydration. The young Kathmari submitted to her ministrations with surprising patience, seeming to understand that she was trying to help. As she worked, Sarah found herself talking to her patient, explaining what she was doing even though she knew it couldn't understand her words. "These are nutrients," she said, adjusting in 4 drip. "Your body needs them to heal properly. And this," she gestured to a warming blanket, "should help with your core temperature regulation." The alien's response was always that same soft purring sound, and Sarah began to realize it might be attempting to communicate. There was a rhythm and variation to the sounds that suggested meaning beyond simple contentment. As the hours passed, Sarah watched her patient grow stronger and more alert. The alien's natural curiosity began to emerge as its physical condition improved, and it started exploring its new environment with careful, deliberate movements. It was during one of these explorations that Sarah made a discovery that would change everything. The young Kathmari had been examining a standard medical tablet, holding it with obvious fascination. As Sarah watched, the alien began touching the screen with its clawed appendages, and, to her amazement, symbols appeared. At first, she thought it was randomly activating the touch interface. But, as she looked closer, Sarah realized the symbols formed patterns, crude but recognizable drawings that depicted stick figures and simple objects. The alien was trying to communicate through pictures. Sarah's excitement was tempered by the realization that she was witnessing something extraordinary. This young Kathmari was displaying problem-solving abilities and communication skills that its own species had either ignored or failed to recognize. Whatever genetic variations had marked it as defective might actually represent evolutionary advantages. She pulled up a chair beside her patient and activated the tablet's drawing program. Slowly, carefully, she began to draw simple pictures, a representation of herself, the medical bay, basic objects and concepts. The alien watched with intense concentration, and, within minutes was responding with its own drawings. The communication breakthrough came when the alien drew a picture that unmistakably represented the containment unit from the Kathmari ship, followed by a drawing of itself looking distressed. Then, it drew a picture of Sarah and itself together, with symbolic representations that clearly indicated gratitude and friendship. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. This intelligent, feeling being had been condemned to death by its own species for the crime of being different. But, here, in this sterile medical bay on a remote space station, it was demonstrating abilities that its captors had never bothered to discover. Over the following days, their communication system grew more sophisticated. The alien, who began indicating through drawings that it wished to be called something that translated roughly to Starsinger, proved to be remarkably intelligent and adaptable. It learned human gestures quickly and began incorporating them into its communication repertoire. More importantly, Starsinger began showing signs of psychological healing. The fearful, cowering creature that had been dumped on the station like unwanted cargo was transforming into a curious, affectionate being with a personality all its own. It was also becoming clear that Starsinger's physical differences were indeed advantages rather than defects. Its flexible crest allowed it to perceive electromagnetic fields that the medical equipment generated, giving it an almost supernatural ability to predict equipment malfunctions. Its enhanced visual system let it see details that even Sarah's trained eye missed, and, on several occasions, Starsinger's observations led to improved diagnoses for other patients. But, perhaps most remarkable was Starsinger's emotional intelligence. Despite everything it had suffered, the young alien showed no signs of hatred or resentment toward its own species. Instead, it demonstrated a capacity for compassion that seemed to extend to all living things. When an injured Zephyrian child was brought to the medical bay, crying in pain and fear, Starsinger immediately moved to comfort the young alien. Despite the language barriers, it somehow managed to communicate reassurance and comfort, using gentle touches and soft sounds that transcended species differences. Sarah watched in amazement as the Zephyrian child's distress faded, replaced by fascination with its unusual comforter. Within minutes, Starsinger had the child laughing at simple games and visual tricks that utilized its unique physical capabilities. Incredible, breathed Dr. Williams, Sarah's supervisor, who had come to check on the unauthorized refugee. I've never seen anything like it. That creature has natural healing instincts that rival our best counselors. Sarah nodded, her mind already working on the implications. Starsinger isn't just intelligent, it's empathetic in a way that might be rare even among its own species. What the Kethmari saw as genetic defects might actually be evolutionary adaptations toward cooperation and healing. Dr. Williams frowned. You're suggesting that an entire species might be evolving away from their current aggressive tendencies, and they're actively eliminating the genetic lines that represent that evolution? It's possible, Sarah replied, watching Starsinger continue to comfort the young patient. Think about it, they described reduced aggression markers as a defect. But, from our perspective, those same markers might indicate enhanced social intelligence and emotional development. The implications were staggering. If Sarah was right, then, the Kethmari weren't just practicing genetic purification, they were actively preventing their own species' evolution toward a more cooperative and peaceful future. As word of Starsinger's abilities spread through the station, other medical staff began requesting its assistance with difficult cases. The young alien seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of healing that complemented human medical technology beautifully. But, it was Starsinger's interaction with children that truly demonstrated its remarkable nature. Regardless of species, young beings seemed drawn to the gentle alien, finding comfort in its presence that they couldn't get from purely human caregivers. Sarah began documenting everything, creating a comprehensive record of Starsinger's abilities and progress. If her suspicions were correct, this information could have profound implications for humanity's understanding of alien evolution and psychology. 3 weeks after Starsinger's arrival, Sarah received a communication that changed everything. The message came through official Federation channels, marked with the highest priority codes. The Kethmari hegemony was demanding the return of their escaped genetic waste for proper disposal. They claimed that Starsinger carried dangerous pathogens that could contaminate other species, and they were threatening to sever all diplomatic relations with the Federation if their demands weren't met. Sarah stared at the message in growing horror. Starsinger had never shown any signs of disease, and her comprehensive medical scans had revealed nothing that could be considered dangerous to other species. The Kethmari were lying. but they were doing so through official diplomatic channels that carried significant political weight. She found Starsinger in the children's ward, entertaining a group of young patients from various species with displays of its electromagnetic sensing abilities. The alien had learned to create beautiful patterns of light by manipulating the medical equipment's electromagnetic fields, turning the sterile ward into something resembling a magical playground. As Sarah watched, she realized that Starsinger represented something the Kethmari couldn't tolerate, proof that their rigid genetic standards were not only wrong but actively harmful to their species' development. By allowing Starsinger to live and thrive, humanity was demonstrating possibilities that threatened the Kethmari's entire social structure. The young alien sensed her distress and approached with obvious concern, making soft questioning sounds that Sarah had learned meant what's wrong in their developing communication system. Sarah knelt beside her friend and patient, gently stroking the flexible crest that the Kethmari had considered malformed. "I don't know how to tell you this," she said softly, "but your people want you back. And I'm afraid they're not planning anything good." Starsinger's large eyes seemed to understand more than it should have. It made a series of soft sounds that Sarah had learned indicated sadness, then began drawing on the tablet they always kept nearby. The picture that emerged made Sarah's heart ache. Starsinger drew itself being led away from the station, then showed a representation of Sarah looking sad. But the final panel of the drawing showed something unexpected. Starsinger drew itself and Sarah together again, with symbols indicating hope and determination. Somehow, this remarkable alien was expressing confidence that they would find a way through the crisis together. Sarah hugged her patient gently, careful of the delicate bone structure beneath the alien's skin. "You're right," she whispered. "We'll find a way. I promise you that." But, even as she made the promise, Sarah wondered how she could possibly keep it. The Kethmari had the weight of diplomatic protocol on their side, and Starsinger was technically their citizen despite the abandonment. Fighting them would require resources and political support that a simple station doctor didn't possess. As if summoned by her thoughts, Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway with a grim expression. "Dr. Chen, I need to see you in my office. We've received some additional communications regarding your patient." Sarah's heart sank. She gave Starsinger one final reassuring touch before following her supervisor through the station's corridors. Whatever was waiting in that office, she suspected it wouldn't be good news. But, as they walked, Sarah found herself thinking about everything Starsinger had accomplished in just 3 weeks. The alien had transformed from a condemned prisoner into a valued member of the station's medical team. It had demonstrated intelligence, compassion, and abilities that its own species refused to recognize. If that wasn't worth fighting for, Sarah didn't know what was. The confrontation with station administration would come soon enough. But, for now, Sarah focused on the remarkable being that had chosen to trust humanity with its life and future. Whatever happened next, she was determined that Starsinger's story wouldn't end the way the Kethmari intended. The young alien deserved better than that. And, perhaps, just perhaps, humanity could be the species to ensure it got the chance it deserved. Dr. Williams' office felt smaller than usual as Sarah sat across from her supervisor, watching him review the mounting pile of diplomatic communications on his desk. The past 48 hours had transformed Starsinger from a simple medical case into a potential interstellar incident. "The situation is getting complicated," Chen, Williams said, his weathered face showing signs of sleepless nights. "The Kethmari aren't backing down. If anything, they're escalating their demands." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Through the office's viewport, she could see Starsinger in the children's ward, still entertaining young patients despite the uncertainty surrounding its future. The alien's ability to bring joy to suffering children remained unchanged, regardless of the political storm brewing around it. "What exactly are they claiming now?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. Williams activated his desk display, showing a series of official communications from the Kethmari hegemony. They're no longer just demanding return of their citizen. They're now claiming that Starsinger carries a unique pathogen that could cause a pandemic if it spreads to other species. They're also suggesting that our refusal to return it constitutes an act of biological warfare. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "That's absolutely false. I've run every pathogen screen in our database. Starsinger is completely healthy. I know that, and you know that, but the Federation Council is taking their claims seriously. They can't afford to ignore potential biological threats, no matter how unlikely they seem.
The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. They're going to order Starsinger's return, aren't they?
Williams nodded grimly.
The preliminary hearing is scheduled for tomorrow.
Unless we can provide compelling evidence that the Kethmari's claims are false, the Federation will have no choice but to honor their extradition request.
Sarah stood and began pacing the small office. This is insane.
We're talking about condemning an innocent being to death based on lies and fabricated evidence. The Federation sees it differently, Williams replied. They see it as choosing between one individual and, potentially billions of lives across dozens of worlds. From a purely mathematical standpoint, the choice seems obvious.
Mathematics, Sarah said bitterly. Is that all we've become? Just numbers on a spreadsheet? Before Williams could respond, an alert chimed on his communication system.
He frowned as he read the incoming message, his expression growing even more concerned.
What is it? Sarah asked. Ambassador Tvek wants to meet with you.
She's requesting an immediate conference regarding Starsinger's case.
Sarah's pulse quickened. Ambassador Tvek was the Federation's senior diplomat at New Geneva, a Vulcan-like species known for their logical approach to problem-solving.
If she was getting involved directly, it meant the situation had escalated beyond simple medical jurisdiction.
When and where? Conference Room 7, in 1 hour. Shun.
Williams paused, choosing his words carefully. Tvek has a reputation for being absolutely logical in her decisions.
Emotional appeals won't work with her.
If you want to save Starsinger, you'll need facts, evidence, and logical arguments. Sarah nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. She had 1 hour to prepare a case that could save Starsinger's life. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing, but she'd faced impossible odds before. I need access to all of Starsinger's medical records, she said. Every scan, every test result, every behavioral observation. And I need to review the Kethmari's genetic purity protocols. Williams was already transferring the files to her personal tablet.
It's all there. Sarah. I want you to know that whatever happens, you've done something remarkable here.
That alien has touched more lives in 3 weeks than most beings do in a lifetime.
Sarah managed a weak smile. Tell that to the Federation Council.
She left Williams' office and headed straight for the children's ward. Starsinger needed to know what was happening, regardless of how difficult the conversation might be. She found the young alien in its usual spot, surrounded by a diverse group of young patients from various species. Starsinger was demonstrating its electromagnetic abilities, creating a miniature light show that had the children mesmerized. Despite the language barriers between species, the universal language of wonder and joy transcended all communication difficulties. Starsinger, Sarah called softly. The alien's head turned immediately, those large, expressive eyes focusing on her with obvious affection. It approached with the graceful movements that had become familiar over the past weeks.
Sarah knelt to Starsinger's level and activated their communication tablet.
Drawing had become their primary means of complex communication, supplemented by gestures and emotional expressions that seemed surprisingly universal. She began with a simple drawing showing Starsinger and herself, then added figures representing the Kethmari.
Starsinger's crest flattened slightly as it recognized the representation of its former captors.
Next, Sarah drew a building that represented the Federation government, with figures inside making decisions. She showed the Kethmari figures talking to the government figures, with symbols indicating demands and threats. Starsinger watched intently as the story unfolded in simple drawings. When Sarah reached the part showing potential separation, the alien made a soft sound of distress but continued watching with remarkable composure.
Finally, Sarah drew herself holding up a hand in a stop gesture, followed by pictures showing her presenting evidence to the government figures.
She concluded with a question mark, indicating uncertainty about the outcome. Starsinger studied the drawings for several minutes, then took the stylus and began adding its own illustrations.
What it drew made Sarah's throat tighten with emotion.
The alien had drawn itself being taken away by the Kethmari, but, then, added a series of panels showing the children it had been helping. In each panel, the young patients looked sad and afraid without Starsinger's presence. The final panel showed Starsinger looking back toward the station with obvious longing. It understood perfectly what was at stake, not just for itself but for all the beings it had come to care about. Sarah hugged the young alien gently. "I'm going to fight for you," she whispered. "I promise." Starsinger responded with that soft purring sound that had become so familiar, then surprised Sarah by drawing one more picture. It showed Sarah facing a large group of authority figures, with Starsinger standing beside her, offering support. Even facing the prospect of its own death, Starsinger was offering to help with its defense. Sarah spent the next 45 minutes in intense preparation, reviewing every detail of Starsinger's case and the Kethmari's claims. The more she studied the evidence, the more convinced she became that this was about far more than genetic purity or biological contamination. The Kethmari were afraid of what Starsinger represented. The young aliens' success at New Geneva proved that their genetic defects were actually advantages. If that information became widely known, it could destabilize their entire social structure. By condemning Starsinger to death, they weren't just eliminating a single individual, they were suppressing evidence that their entire genetic ideology was flawed. Conference Room 7 was one of the station's most formal spaces, designed to accommodate diplomatic meetings between various alien species. The neutral lighting and adaptive seating could be configured for dozens of different physiologies, creating an environment where all parties could feel comfortable. Ambassador Tvek was already waiting when Sarah arrived. The tall, pale humanoid had the characteristic pointed ears and analytical expression of her species. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held the calculating intelligence that had made her one of the Federation's most effective diplomats. "Dr. Chen," Tvek said without preamble. "Please, be seated. We have much to discuss and limited time in which to do it." Sarah settled into the chair across from the ambassador, placing her tablet and medical scanner on the table between them. "Ambassador, I appreciate you taking the time to review this case personally. The case has implications beyond the fate of a single individual," Tvek replied. "The Kethmari hegemony represents 17 star systems and over 40 billion citizens. Their trade agreements and military cooperation are crucial to Federation security. These are facts that cannot be ignored." Sarah felt her heart sink, but she pressed forward. "I understand the political considerations, but we're also talking about fundamental principles of justice and medical ethics." "Indeed. Which is why I wish to review all available evidence before making my recommendation to the Federation Council." Tvek activated a holographic display that filled the air between them with data streams and analysis charts. "Present your case, Doctor." Sarah took a deep breath and began with the medical evidence. She displayed Starsinger's comprehensive health scans, showing the complete absence of any pathogenic organisms. She explained the advanced screening protocols they'd used, which exceeded even Federation standards for biological contamination detection. "As you can see," she concluded, "there is absolutely no evidence to support the Kethmari's claims of biological contamination. Starsinger poses no health risk to any known species." Tvek nodded, making notes on her own device. The medical evidence is indeed compelling. However, the Kethmari claim that the pathogen in question is unknown to Federation science and may not be detectable by current methods. "Then, they should provide evidence of its existence," Sarah replied. "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. They're asking us to accept the existence of an undetectable, theoretical pathogen based solely on their word." A reasonable point. "What else can you offer in Starsinger's defense?" Sarah activated a series of recordings showing Starsinger's interactions with patients from various species. These recordings demonstrate that Starsinger has been in close contact with dozens of individuals from multiple worlds over the past 3 weeks. If there were any pathogenic transmission, we would have seen evidence by now. Tvek studied the recordings with obvious interest. The subject appears to have remarkable empathic abilities. Is this typical of the Kethmari species? That's where things get interesting, Sarah said, pulling up her analysis of Kethmari genetic data. Based on the limited biological information we have about their species, Starsinger's traits are indeed atypical.
But, rather than being defects, they appear to represent evolutionary adaptations.
She displayed comparative genetic analyses showing how Starsinger's variations could provide advantages in communication, environmental adaptation, and social cooperation. The Kethmari classify these traits as genetic defects because they don't align with their cultural values of aggression and individual competition. But, from an objective biological standpoint, Starsinger may represent the next stage of Kethmari evolution. Tvek's eyebrows rose slightly, the closest her species came to showing surprise.
You're suggesting that the Kethmari are systematically eliminating genetic lines that could benefit their species' long-term survival? That's exactly what I'm suggesting. And, I believe that's the real reason they want Starsinger back. It's not about contamination or genetic purity, it's about suppressing evidence that their entire social structure is based on flawed premises. The ambassador leaned back in her chair, considering the implications. If your analysis is correct, this case involves not just individual rights but the potential misdirection of an entire species' evolutionary development. Sarah nodded. Starsinger isn't just a refugee seeking sanctuary. It's living proof that the Kethmari's genetic policies are not only morally wrong but scientifically invalid. Tvek made additional notes, then fixed Sarah with her penetrating gaze. Dr. Chen, I must ask you a direct question. Setting aside your obvious emotional attachment to this individual, do you truly believe that the evidence supports granting it permanent Federation asylum? Sarah met the ambassador's eyes without flinching.
I believe that Starsinger represents something extraordinary, an individual who has overcome tremendous adversity to become a force for healing and compassion. The evidence shows that it poses no threat to anyone, while its presence has already benefited dozens of patients and medical staff.
And the political consequences of defying the Kethmari? If we base our decisions solely on political expedience, then we've abandoned the principles that make the Federation worth preserving. Sometimes doing what's right requires taking risks.
Tvek was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the data displays and making calculations on her personal device.
Finally, she looked up with an expression that might have been the beginning of a smile.
Dr. Chen, your arguments are logically sound and supported by substantial evidence. However, there is one factor we have not yet discussed.
Sarah's heart began to race. What factor? Starsinger itself.
The individual in question has not been given the opportunity to speak in its own defense.
Federation law requires that all sentient beings be allowed to present their own testimony in asylum hearings.
But Starsinger can't speak our languages, and we don't have translators for Kethmari communication protocols. Perhaps not verbal communication, Tvek said thoughtfully, but you've demonstrated that it can communicate effectively through visual means. I believe an asylum hearing should include testimony from Starsinger itself.
Sarah felt a surge of hope. You're willing to schedule a formal hearing? I'm willing to recommend that the Federation Council delay any extradition orders until a full asylum hearing can be conducted.
However, I must warn you that the ultimate decision will depend on Starsinger's ability to demonstrate its case for Federation protection.
They were running out of time.
The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following morning, which meant Sarah had less than 18 hours to prepare Starsinger for what might be the most important presentation of its life. Sarah found Starsinger in the medical bay, assisting with the treatment of an injured Andorian trader who had been brought in with severe burns. The alien was using its electromagnetic sensing abilities to monitor the patient's neural activity, providing real-time feedback that allowed the medical team to adjust their treatment protocols with unprecedented precision. Remarkable, breathed Dr. Patel, the trauma specialist leading the treatment.
Starsinger can detect microfluctuations in the patient's nervous system that our equipment can't even measure. It's like having a living biometric scanner.
Sarah watched with pride as Starsinger worked alongside the human medical team with seamless coordination. The young alien had found its place in their community, contributing unique abilities that enhanced everyone's effectiveness.
But, tomorrow, all of that could end.
Starsinger, she called softly when there was a break in the treatment.
I need to talk to you about tomorrow.
The alien approached with its usual graceful movements, but Sarah could see concern in those large, expressive eyes. Starsinger had clearly sensed the tension that had been building around the station as news of the asylum hearing spread. Sarah led Starsinger to a quiet corner of the medical bay and pulled up their communication tablet. Over the past weeks, their shared visual language had become surprisingly sophisticated, allowing for complex discussions about abstract concepts. She began by drawing representations of the formal hearing process, Starsinger facing a group of authority figures, with Sarah beside it for support. Then, she showed Starsinger communicating its own story through pictures and demonstrations. Starsinger watched intently, occasionally making soft questioning sounds when it needed clarification about specific details. When Sarah finished explaining the process, the alien took the stylus and began drawing its own response. What emerged was a comprehensive visual narrative that demonstrated Starsinger's remarkable intelligence and emotional depth. The alien drew its early life among the Kethmari, showing how its differences had made it an outcast. It illustrated the fear and pain of being condemned as genetic waste, followed by the hope and healing it had found among humans. But the most powerful part of Starsinger's story came at the end. It drew detailed pictures of all the patients it had helped at New Geneva, the frightened children it had comforted, the injured beings it had assisted in healing, the medical breakthroughs it had enabled through its unique abilities. In simple drawings, Starsinger was making the case that its value lay not in conforming to Kethmari standards but in contributing to the greater good of all sentient life. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched Starsinger work. The alien was preparing to fight for its life with nothing but pictures and the hope that its adopted human family would stand by it. "You're incredible," Sarah whispered, gently stroking Starsinger's flexible crest. "Tomorrow, you're going to show them exactly what they'd be losing if they send you back." Starsinger made its soft purring sound and drew one final picture, Sarah and Starsinger standing together, with symbols representing strength, hope, and unbreakable bonds of friendship. Whatever happened in the hearing tomorrow, they would face it together. The rest of the evening was spent in intensive preparation. Sarah worked with Starsinger to organize its visual testimony into a coherent narrative that would be compelling to Federation officials. They practiced using the holographic display systems that would be available in the formal hearing room, ensuring that Starsinger could present its case with maximum impact. Other members of the medical staff stopped by to offer support and encouragement. Word of the hearing had spread throughout the station, and Starsinger had touched far more lives than Sarah had realized. Maintenance workers who had seen the alien helping in the children's ward, security officers who had watched it comfort frightened patients, researchers who had benefited from its unique observational abilities, all of them wanted to express their support. Dr. Williams arrived near midnight with news that changed everything. "Sarah, I've been in contact with the Federation's Xenobiology department. They're fascinated by your analysis of Starsinger's genetic variations. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the head of evolutionary xenobiology, wants to testify on Starsinger's behalf." Sarah looked up from the presentation materials she'd been organizing. "Dr. Harper? She's one of the most respected scientists in the Federation. And she spent the past 6 hours reviewing your data. She believes Starsinger may represent the most significant example of rapid evolutionary adaptation she's ever encountered. She's prepared to testify that returning Starsinger to the Kethmari would constitute a crime against scientific knowledge." For the first time since the crisis began, Sarah felt genuine hope. "When will she arrive?" "She's already here. Her ship docked 20 minutes ago. She wants to meet with Starsinger immediately to conduct her own evaluations." Sarah looked at Starsinger, who had been following the conversation through their visual communication system. The alien's crest was raised in a display that Sarah had learned indicated excitement and curiosity. "What do you think?" she asked, showing Starsinger drawings that represented the new scientist and the potential help she could provide. Starsinger responded immediately, drawing enthusiastic agreement and eagerness to meet anyone who might help its case. Dr. Elizabeth Harper turned out to be a compact woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held the intense focus of someone who had spent decades studying the mysteries of life across the galaxy. She examined Starsinger with scientific detachment but also with obvious respect for the alien's intelligence and dignity. "Fascinating," she murmured as she reviewed Sarah's genetic analyses. "The electromagnetic sensitivity, the enhanced visual processing, the modified social behavior patterns, these aren't random mutations. They form a coherent package of adaptations that would provide significant survival advantages in a cooperative social environment.
She looked up at Sarah with growing excitement. Dr. Chen, I believe you've stumbled upon something extraordinary. Star Singer may represent a natural evolutionary response to the limitations of the Kethmari's aggressive social structure. What do you mean? Evolution doesn't just operate on physical traits. It also selects for behavioral and social adaptations that improve species survival. If the Kethmari's aggressive culture is creating environmental pressures, perhaps resource scarcity, social instability, or conflict with other species, then evolution would naturally select for individuals who can function effectively in cooperative environments. Harper gestured toward Star Singer, who was demonstrating its electromagnetic abilities for her examination. Star Singer isn't a genetic defect. It's evolution's answer to the Kethmari's cultural dead end. By eliminating individuals like this, they're preventing their own species from adapting to a changing galaxy. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. So when Star Singer succeeds in our cooperative environment, it's proving that these traits are advantageous rather than defective. Exactly. And, more than that, Star Singer's success suggests that the Kethmari's current social structure may be actively harmful to their species' long-term survival. The implications were staggering. If Harper was right, then, the hearing tomorrow wouldn't just be about one refugee's asylum claim. It would be about preserving evidence of evolutionary adaptation that could transform understanding of how species develop in complex galactic environments. Dr. Harper spent the next several hours conducting her own examinations and interviews with Star Singer. The alien proved remarkably adaptable to her scientific methods, seemingly understanding that these evaluations could be crucial to its future. As dawn approached, Harper compiled her findings into a comprehensive report that would serve as expert testimony in the hearing. Her conclusions were unambiguous. Star Singer represented a genetically valuable individual whose preservation was important not just for humanitarian reasons but for the advancement of scientific knowledge. I'll be testifying that the Federation has a responsibility to protect Star Singer as a living repository of evolutionary data, Harper told Sarah as they made final preparations. The Kethmari may have the legal right to reclaim their citizen, but they don't have the right to destroy scientific evidence of this magnitude. Sarah nodded, feeling more confident about their chances than she had since the crisis began. Between her medical evidence, Harper's scientific analysis, and Star Singer's own compelling testimony, they had built a strong case for asylum. But she also knew that the Kethmari wouldn't surrender easily. They had too much at stake to allow Star Singer's success to become widely known. The hearing would be a battle between competing visions of justice, science, and the rights of individuals versus the perceived needs of societies. As the station's artificial dawn began to brighten the corridors, Sarah made her final preparations. Whatever happened in the hearing, she was determined that Star Singer's voice would be heard clearly and convincingly. The young alien deserved nothing less than the full protection of Federation law and the chance to live freely among beings who valued its unique contributions. The battle for Star Singer's life was about to begin. The Federation hearing chamber on New Geneva had been configured for maximum diplomatic protocol, with seating arrangements that accommodated the physiology of a dozen different species. The morning light streaming through the reinforced viewports created an atmosphere of formal solemnity as representatives from across the galaxy gathered to decide Star Singer's fate. Sarah sat in the advocates section, with Star Singer beside her in a specially designed chair that accommodated the alien's unique physiology. The young Kethmari appeared calm, but Sarah could see the subtle signs of nervousness in the way its crest occasionally flattened against its skull. Across the chamber, the Kethmari delegation commanded attention through sheer physical presence. Three imposing figures in ceremonial armor that gleamed with living metal, their crests raised in displays of authority and aggression. At their head sat High Genetic Arbiter Zethkar, whose age was marked by the intricate patterns of precious metals woven through its crest. Ambassador Tvek entered precisely at the designated time, her formal robes marking her role as the Federation's neutral arbiter. Behind her came the panel of judges, representatives from 5 different Federation worlds who would evaluate the evidence and render judgment. This hearing will determine the asylum status of the individual known as Star Singer, currently claiming refugee protection under Federation law, Tvek announced in her clear, measured voice. The Kethmari hegemony has demanded return of this individual, claiming both legal ownership and biological contamination concerns. She gestured toward the Kethmari delegation. High genetic arbiter Zethkar will present the case for extradition.
Zethkar rose with predatory grace, its voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Sarah's teeth ache. The universal translator rendered its speech in cold, clinical terms that somehow made the content even more chilling. Honorable judges of the Federation, we appear before you today to reclaim stolen property and prevent a potential biological catastrophe. The entity you call Star Singer is a condemned genetic aberration, marked for disposal according to our species' millennia-old purity protocols. The arbiter activated a holographic display showing Kathmari genetic standards and breeding protocols. Our scientific analysis has determined that this individual carries genetic defects that render it unsuitable for reproduction, military service, or productive citizenship.
More critically, it carries a unique pathogen that poses existential threat to all carbon-based life forms. Sarah felt her hands clench as Zethkar continued its presentation. Every word was calculated to dehumanize Star Singer while elevating the supposed threat it represented. The humans who have harbored this contaminated entity have been deceived by its superficial characteristics. They perceive empathic responses and cooperative behaviors, not understanding that these are symptoms of the pathogenic infection that drives its actions. Zethkar's multifaceted eyes seemed to focus directly on Star Singer as it delivered its final argument. This entity was lawfully condemned by proper genetic authority. Its escape and the Federation's harboring of it constitutes theft of Kathmari property and knowing facilitation of biological terrorism. The chamber fell silent as Zethkar resumed its seat. Sarah could feel the weight of the accusations hanging in the air like a toxin. The Kathmari had crafted their argument to exploit every fear and prejudice that might influence the judge's decision. Ambassador Tvek turned towards Sarah's section. Dr. Chen, you may present your case for asylum. Sarah rose, her legs feeling unsteady despite her preparation. This was at the moment when everything she and Star Singer had built together would be tested against the cold calculations of interstellar politics. Honorable judges, she began, her voice gaining strength as she focused on the facts rather than her emotions. What you've heard from the Kathmari delegation is a carefully constructed lie designed to mask a crime against their own species. She activated her own holographic display, showing Star Singer's comprehensive medical scans. These are the results of 3 weeks of intensive medical evaluation using the most advanced screening protocols available to Federation science. They show absolutely no evidence of pathogenic contamination. The display shifted to show comparative analysis of multiple species that had been in contact with Star Singer. Additionally, over 200 individuals from 17 different species have had direct contact with Star Singer during its time at New Geneva. Not one has shown any signs of infection or illness. Sarah could see some of the judges leaning forward with interest as she continued. The medical evidence clearly demonstrates that the Kathmari's contamination claims are false. But the question remains, why would they fabricate such serious accusations? She gestured toward Star Singer, who began to rise from its chair. The answer lies in what Star Singer truly represents, not a genetic defect, but an evolutionary advancement that threatens the Kathmari's entire social structure. Star Singer approached the central display area with dignified composure. Sarah had spent hours coaching the alien on how to present its case to the mixed audience of Federation representatives, and she was proud to see that Star Singer showed no signs of the fear and trauma that had marked its early days on the station. Star Singer cannot speak your languages, Sarah continued, but it has developed a sophisticated visual communication system that will allow it to tell its own story. The holographic display activated, and Star Singer began its presentation. The alien had refined its visual narrative over weeks of practice, and the story that emerged was both heart-wrenching and inspiring. Star Singer began by showing its early life among the Kathmari, using simple but effective drawings to illustrate the rigid social hierarchy that governed every aspect of their society. It showed how individuals were sorted from birth based on genetic markers, with those deemed perfect receiving all advantages while those with variations were marginalized or eliminated. The alien's drawings became more detailed as it illustrated its own experiences, the fear and pain of being different, the gradual realization that it was condemned for traits it couldn't control, the terror of being marked for disposal while still possessing consciousness and feelings. But the most powerful part of Star Singer's presentation came when it began showing its time at New Geneva.
Using a combination of drawings and direct demonstrations, it illustrated how its supposedly defective traits had actually proven advantageous in the station's cooperative environment.
Starsinger demonstrated its electromagnetic sensing abilities, showing how it could detect medical equipment malfunctions before they became dangerous. It illustrated its enhanced visual processing by identifying minute details in medical scans that even experienced doctors had missed. Most compellingly, it showed its empathic abilities by accurately reading the emotional states of the judges themselves, adjusting its presentation style to match their individual communication preferences. Sarah watched the judges' reactions with growing hope. Even the most skeptical representatives were clearly impressed by Starsinger's intelligence and abilities. The alien was proving through direct demonstration that the Kethmari's genetic standards were not only cruel but scientifically invalid. As you can see, Sarah said as Starsinger concluded its presentation, the individual before you is not a defective aberration but a highly intelligent being with unique abilities that benefit everyone around it. The Kethmari wants Starsinger destroyed not because it's dangerous, but because its very existence challenges their fundamental beliefs about genetic superiority. She activated a final display showing the children Starsinger had helped during its time on the station. This is the real threat Starsinger poses to the Kethmari, proof that cooperation and empathy are more valuable than aggression and competition. Dr. Harper rose to present her scientific analysis, adding weight to Sarah's arguments with detailed evolutionary theory and genetic analysis. Her testimony was methodical and compelling, demonstrating that Starsinger's traits represented natural adaptations that could benefit the entire Kethmari species if allowed to spread. The systematic elimination of individuals like Starsinger represents a fundamental misunderstanding of evolutionary biology, Harper concluded. The Kethmari are actively preventing their own species from adapting to the challenges of a complex galactic environment. When the expert testimonies were complete, Ambassador Tvek called for the Kethmari delegation's response. High genetic arbiter Zethkar rose again, its crest now displaying patterns that Sarah had learned to recognize as extreme agitation. The humans present clever arguments and impressive displays, Zethkar said, its harmonic voice carrying undertones of barely controlled anger. But they cannot change fundamental biological realities. This entity carries genetic contamination that threatens the purity of our species and, potentially, all life in the galaxy. The Arbiter activated a new display showing what appeared to be genetic analysis data. Our latest scans have detected pathogenic markers that the human's primitive equipment cannot identify. These markers indicate active contamination that could spread to any being that comes into prolonged contact with the entity. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized what the Kethmari were doing. They were fabricating new evidence to counter her medical findings, knowing that the Federation judges wouldn't have the resources to independently verify the complex genetic data being presented. Furthermore, Zethkar continued, the entity's apparent abilities are themselves evidence of pathogenic alteration. No natural Kethmari would display such aberrant behavioral patterns without external contamination influencing its neural development. The Arbiter's final argument was delivered with chilling certainty. If the Federation refuses to return our property, we will be forced to conclude that you have been compromised by the same pathogenic influence. The hegemony will have no choice but to quarantine all Federation worlds that have been exposed to this contamination. The threat was clear: return Starsinger or face complete severance of diplomatic and trade relationships with the Kethmari hegemony. Sarah could see the judges weighing the political implications against the evidence they had heard. Ambassador Tvek called for a recess to allow the judges to deliberate. As the formal session suspended, Sarah gathered with her team to assess their chances. The new genetic data is completely fabricated, Dr. Harper said grimly. But, proving that will require analysis resources that aren't available on this station. Sarah looked toward Starsinger, who had remained remarkably composed throughout the proceedings. The alien approached their group and activated the communication tablet, quickly drawing a series of pictures that made Sarah's breath catch. Starsinger had drawn representations of the Kethmari data displays, but with subtle indicators showing that certain genetic markers were false. The alien had recognized the fabrication using its enhanced visual processing abilities and was trying to warn them. Starsinger knows they're lying, Sarah said excitedly. Can you show the judges exactly which data points are fabricated? Starsinger responded with enthusiastic agreement,
rapidly drawing detailed analysis of the Kethmari's genetic evidence. The alien's superior pattern recognition abilities had allowed it to identify inconsistencies and fabrications that even sophisticated analysis equipment might miss.
When the hearing resumed, Sarah requested permission to present additional evidence.
Starsinger approached the display area again, this time analyzing the Kethmari's genetic data in real time. Using the same visual communication methods that had proven so effective earlier, Starsinger systematically identified false data points, inconsistent genetic markers, and fabricated pathogenic signatures in the Kethmari evidence. The alien's presentation was methodical and convincing, clearly demonstrating that the contamination claims were based on deliberately falsified information. The judges watched in fascination as Starsinger essentially peer-reviewed the Kethmari's scientific claims in real time, finding flaws and inconsistencies that exposed the deception.
High genetic arbiter Zethkar rose in obvious fury. The entity's analysis is itself evidence of contamination. No natural being could possess such analytical capabilities without pathogenic enhancement. Or, Dr. Harper interjected, Starsinger possesses natural abilities that represent evolutionary advancement beyond the Kethmari's current understanding. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything Sarah had seen in a diplomatic setting. The Kethmari delegation's composure cracked completely as their fabricated evidence was systematically dismantled. Zethkar's threats became increasingly desperate and violent, culminating in a declaration that the Federation's protection of Starsinger constituted an act of war. Ambassador Tvek called for order, but the damage was done. The Kethmari's extreme reaction to having their evidence challenged had revealed the desperation behind their claims. The judges deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their decision. The senior judge, a distinguished Andorian with decades of diplomatic experience, delivered the verdict with obvious satisfaction. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, this panel finds that the individual known as Starsinger poses no biological threat to Federation citizens and has demonstrated both intelligence and capabilities that warrant full protection under Federation law. Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face as the judge continued. Furthermore, the evidence suggests that the Kethmari's genetic purity protocols represent a fundamental violation of sentient rights as defined by Federation Charter. We recommend that the Federation Council consider sanctions against the Kethmari hegemony until such practices are discontinued. The ruling went beyond simple asylum. The Federation was taking a stand against the Kethmari's entire genetic ideology. Starsinger hadn't just won its freedom, it had exposed a system of oppression that could no longer hide behind claims of biological necessity. High genetic arbiter Zethkar and its delegation left the hearing chamber without another word, their departure marked by the kind of rigid anger that suggested the conflict was far from over. But, for the moment, Starsinger was safe under Federation protection. In the months that followed, Starsinger's case became a catalyst for broader change throughout Federation space. Dr. Harper's research on evolutionary adaptation gained widespread attention, leading to new policies protecting genetic diversity across multiple species. Starsinger itself became something of a celebrity, traveling to various Federation worlds as a living example of the benefits of genetic diversity and social cooperation. Everywhere it went, the alien's unique abilities and compassionate nature challenged prejudices and stereotypes about what constituted genetic superiority. But, perhaps most importantly, Starsinger's success inspired other genetic minorities within the Kethmari hegemony to seek Federation asylum. Over the following years, dozens of genetically defective Kethmari found their way to Federation worlds, where their diverse abilities proved invaluable in fields ranging from medicine to engineering to art. Sarah continued working at New Geneva, but her role evolved beyond simple medical practice. She became the Federation's leading expert on Kethmari physiology and psychology, helping refugees from the hegemony adapt to life in more accepting societies. Starsinger remained her closest collaborator and friend, working alongside human medical teams to develop new treatments and diagnostic techniques. The alien's empathic abilities proved particularly valuable in treating psychological trauma, allowing it to help other refugees overcome the mental damage inflicted by genetic discrimination. On quiet evenings, when the station's artificial day cycle dimmed to simulate night, Sarah and Starsinger would often sit together in the observation lounge, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. They had developed a comfortable routine of shared silence and gentle communication, each drawing strength from the friendship that had saved them both.
Star Singer would create its beautiful electromagnetic light displays, turning the sterile medical environment into something magical. Sarah would share stories of her own past, her dreams for the future, and her hopes for a galaxy where beings like Star Singer could live without fear. Sometimes they were joined by other refugees, or by the children Star Singer had helped heal, or by scientists studying the aliens' remarkable abilities. But the core of their relationship remained unchanged: a doctor and her patient who had become family, proving that the bonds of compassion could transcend any barrier of species or culture. 3 years after the asylum hearing, Sarah received an encrypted communication that changed everything. It came from deep within Kethmari space, transmitted by someone using outdated Federation protocols to avoid detection. The message was brief but electrifying: underground network established.
Genetic minorities organizing. Star Singer's success provides hope.
Request assistance with evacuation protocols for endangered individuals.
Sarah showed the message to Star Singer, watching as the alien's crest rose in excitement and determination.
The young being that had once cowered in a containment unit, marked for death by its own species, had become a symbol of hope for others facing the same persecution.
"Are you ready to help save your people?" Sarah asked, knowing the answer before Star Singer began drawing its enthusiastic response.
The alien's pictures showed spacecraft full of refugees finding safety among the Federation worlds, with Star Singer serving as guide and advocate for beings who had never imagined that their differences could be strengths rather than failures. Sarah smiled as she watched her friend's drawings become more elaborate and optimistic.
"Then, let's start planning. I think it's time to show the galaxy what the Kethmari could become if they embraced genetic diversity instead of fearing it."
Over the following months, they worked with Federation intelligence services to establish secret evacuation routes for endangered Kethmari minorities. Star Singer's intimate knowledge of its species' psychology and social structures proved invaluable in identifying individuals at risk and developing communication methods that could operate beneath the hegemony's surveillance networks. The rescue operations were dangerous and complex, requiring careful coordination between Federation assets and underground networks within Kethmari space. But they were also remarkably successful, saving hundreds of beings who would otherwise have been eliminated for the crime of genetic nonconformity. Each successful rescue brought new abilities and perspectives to Federation space. The refugees included individuals with enhanced mathematical capabilities, improved environmental adaptations, advanced sensory abilities, and emotional intelligences that rivaled Star Singer's own gifts. Slowly but steadily, the Kethmari exile community began to demonstrate the true potential of their species' genetic diversity. Research stations benefited from their unique observational abilities. Medical centers gained new insights into healing and recovery. Art and culture flourished as refugee artists introduced new forms of expression that no one had imagined possible. The impact wasn't limited to the refugees themselves. Human scientists and medical professionals working alongside the Kethmari exiles began to understand that genetic diversity represented one of the galaxy's most valuable resources. The rigid standardization that the hegemony pursued was revealed as not just morally wrong but strategically disastrous. Dr. Elizabeth Harper published a landmark study showing how genetic diversity among the refugee population was already leading to hybrid innovations that neither humans nor Kethmari could have achieved alone. The paper became required reading in xenobiology programs across Federation space. But it was Star Singer who provided the most compelling evidence of what the Kethmari species could become. Now fully adult and completely adapted to Federation society, the alien had developed its abilities to levels that amazed even its closest human colleagues. Star Singer could diagnose complex medical conditions through electromagnetic sensing alone, identifying problems that escaped even advanced scanning equipment. Its empathic abilities had evolved to encompass not just emotional states but complex psychological patterns, allowing it to provide therapeutic support that transcended species barriers. Most remarkably, Star Singer had learned to teach its abilities to others. Working with both human students and refugee Kethmari, it developed training programs that helped individuals maximize their own unique capabilities rather than conforming to arbitrary standards. Sarah watched with pride as her former patient became a teacher, healer, and leader in its own right. The frightened, condemned being she had first encountered had transformed into someone who was actively reshaping understanding of what it meant to be intelligent and valuable in a diverse galaxy. 5 years after the asylum hearing, the Kethmari hegemony faced a crisis that validated every argument Sarah and her colleagues had made.
Environmental changes in their core systems created challenges that their rigidly standardized population couldn't adapt to effectively.
Meanwhile, the exile communities in Federation space thrived precisely because their genetic diversity allowed for creative responses to changing conditions. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The beings the hegemony had condemned as genetically inferior were proving more capable of survival and growth than the supposedly superior population that had rejected them.
Pressure mounted within Kethmari society as younger generations began to question the genetic orthodoxy that had dominated their culture for millennia.
Secret communications from within the hegemony reported growing dissent and calls for policy reform. The transformation wasn't immediate or universal, but change was undeniably occurring.
Some Kethmari territories began quietly relaxing their genetic purity requirements.
Others established limited cultural exchange programs with Federation worlds, allowing their citizens to see firsthand what genetic diversity could accomplish. Starsinger followed these developments with careful attention but without bitterness toward the species that had once rejected it. The alien's capacity for forgiveness and hope continued to inspire everyone around it, proving that healing was possible even after the deepest trauma.
"Do you think you'll ever want to go home?" Sarah asked one evening as they watched a Kethmari cultural exchange vessel dock at New Geneva.
Starsinger considered the question for several minutes before drawing its response. The alien's picture showed itself standing at the border between Kethmari and Federation space, serving as a bridge between two worlds. But, rather than returning to its birth culture, Starsinger drew itself, helping transform that culture into something new and better.
"You want to change them from the outside," Sarah interpreted.
"Show them what they could become rather than trying to fix what they are."
Starsinger's enthusiastic agreement confirmed her understanding.
The alien had no desire to return to a society that had condemned it, but it was deeply committed to helping that society evolve beyond its current limitations. It was a uniquely generous response from someone who had every right to harbor resentment and anger. But, then, generosity had always been one of Starsinger's defining characteristics. As Sarah reflected on their journey together, she realized that rescuing Starsinger had taught her as much about humanity as it had about alien species. The decision to risk her career and reputation for the sake of one endangered being had revealed depths of compassion and determination that she hadn't known she possessed. More broadly, Starsinger's story had demonstrated humanity's greatest strength in the galactic community, the willingness to stand up for principles even when doing so carried significant risks. Other species might excel at technology, warfare, or diplomacy, but humans had proven uniquely capable of recognizing value and potential that others overlooked. The Federation itself had been strengthened by the precedent Starsinger's case established. Subsequent asylum hearings consistently favored protection over political expedience, creating a reputation for principled leadership that enhanced human influence throughout the galaxy. But, perhaps most importantly, Starsinger's success had inspired a new generation of human doctors, scientists, and diplomats to look beyond surface differences and recognize the potential for greatness in unexpected places. Sarah continued her work at New Geneva, but her practice had evolved far beyond conventional medicine.
She now served as a specialist in interspecies psychology and adaptation, helping refugees from dozens of worlds find their place in Federation society.
Each new case brought its own challenges and rewards, but all of them built on the foundation she had established with Starsinger. The techniques for communication, trust building, and capability assessment that she had developed with her first alien patient proved applicable across a remarkable range of species and situations. Starsinger remained her closest collaborator and dearest friend, but